Hey creative friends, Dennis C. Nolasco here, welcome back. As promised last time, I want to start talking about the different assignments I do with Evolve Artists. I'll talk about assignments 1 through 3 since they're pretty basic and they're really just exercises, not actual paintings. Well, you're still painting it, but they're not really like paintings. So let me go ahead and talk about assignment 1. Evolve Artists is teaching the student how to just paint with oil paints. So it's super simple. We're just painting different colors into squares. Now in order to get that transferred onto your canvas, they provided a template to use, and then when you use the black carbon paper dark side down to transfer the squares on, you just trace it with your pencil to transfer onto the canvas sheet. As I mentioned on the previous video, there are 4 paints that we use for the 4 values to fill in the different squares. We're not supposed to be using tape or anything to create sharp edges. You have to do everything with your brush. 2 of the main brushes we'll use is the bigger number 12 and also the number 6. There's also number 2, but I haven't really been using that. I don't think it's needed so far. Maybe once you get into like really fine detail, you'll need that. Now, although I have painting experience with watercolor, this is my first time doing oil paints, so it took me super long. It took me over 11 hours. Now, I asked the instructors, they said that's normal for their very first painting for his new students, so I shouldn't worry too much about it. When I did the line, that I traced over onto the canvas, when you're tracing it over, it's still hard to see, kind of, because you're just tracing over whatever the printout is. So, and I noticed when I look at the actual canvas, it was kind of jittery, so I didn't like that. So I need to keep aware of that point. Another thing I also need to keep aware of, keeping my palm off the canvas too. Since watercolors for me, I usually dry them out, with a hair dryer for the different layers. So I don't have an issue with putting my palm onto the watercolor paper. But I had this issue with oil paints, and you can see in the painting I did, you see there's like a big old smudge of my dirty palm on there. And I did that a couple of times, I didn't even realize it. So I had to make sure not to do that. It is what it is. Also, I need some tips on holding the brush steady when painting. Since you don't want to be, having your palm onto the canvas, you have to learn how to have a slow and steady painting technique. And that's the main thing you have to use, is make sure to use your elbows and shoulders, not your wrist. And many times I went over the lines because I didn't have the steady hand. And lastly, making the corners were a big issue for me, the corner of the boxes. I used the number 6 for those, but for me, because the brushes are a little rounded, so I wasn't really used to it at this point. So it was hard for me to get a sharp corner edge. So I took my time with it, but it took me 2 evenings to complete the painting. Now here's the instructor feedback I got. For sake of quality control, make sure to keep the workspace as clean as possible, so I've been doing that now. They also mentioned that when you're tracing the transfer, consider the pressure of your hand resting on the paper, so you make sure you have a light touch, don't bear down onto the paper. These habits take time to build, but eventually it'll benefit you. And a tip for holding brush steady is make sure you rest your hand or pinky on the white of the canvas or the easel. For example, if you did happen to touch something, it would be only just a small pinky smudge, but in general, make sure you don't even touch the painted area. Make sure to hold the brush not too tight or too loose, because both impacts the steadiness. Although the brush is rounded, it has a sharp blade edge, so you got to make sure to, when you get the paint, flatten out the brush so that the brush is shaped with a sharper edge. Now for assignment 2, actually assignment 2 and assignment 3 are the same thing. We're just doing a repetition twice because this assignment is for gradients. And gradients are, as far as oil painting, is probably the hardest thing you have to do. So you want to get a lot of hours practicing your gradients. That's why we're practicing black and white also. Before we even get the colors, we want to make sure to get your gradients down good. Now this one still took me a long time, 8 to 10 hours. Also about 2 evenings of working on the painting. Now when I did it the second time, I still had a hard time doing the gradients. So I redid column 1 and column 2 maybe like a half a dozen times on the same painting because I wanted to make sure I got the gradients right. Most of the issues I was having is because it didn't look smooth and I was getting contamination from the other colors. Like oil painting contamination is a big deal. And I asked a few other people besides the instructors. They gave me tips about cleaning the brush and making sure I mix the admixture. Admixture is when you're actually mixing a combination of paints, make sure I mix it thoroughly. Another tip that helped me was that my lights were a little too runny using 5 drops of linseed oil. So the advice they gave me is instead of using 5 drops, they said try 4 drops instead. They said I did it much better the second time around, and I need to keep the following in mind. They still see the edges with the grading exercise. What I mean by edges is that they don't appear like smooth for me on my paintings. The big thing to avoid is creating stripes. Remember that happens if I dissolve the edge with the same approach that I used to create the buffer. The buffer is the middle area. And make it twice as wide as I think that I'll need. Playing around with what I've been taught. Work at using the intermediate shades to fade the edges. Eventually with practice I'll come more natural. And then I'll be able to see what I'm doing similar to what the video shows. My buffer was a little thin. I should have made it wider so I have more space to work with. So then I could get a better seamless fade. So that's my experience with that. Getting a little better each time with each pass. Alright everybody, until next time, take care and God bless.